We're going to get started here in just a minute. My name is Beth. My colleague Matt Murphy will be hosting here in just a second. If anybody has any questions throughout this webinar, please put them in the chat or the Q&A section. We're going to be hosting a Q&A period after the webinar ends. I also wanted to mention that we will be recording this session, and we should be emailing this out to everybody within the next 24 to 48 hours. Also, just to note, if you do really want your question answered while we are here, please leave your email in the question, and we'll be sure to get back to you via email if we don't get to answer it live. All right, I'm going to hand this over to Matt now to get started.
Thanks, Beth, and it's okay to call me Murph. We're keeping this conversational here today. First of all, Beth, can you confirm that you can see my screen?
I sure can.
All right, that means everyone else should be able to see it too. Well, thanks everyone for joining me today. As Beth mentioned, my name is Matt Murphy, and I'm one of the educational designers here at Zorbit's Math Adventure. I'm a former teacher. I've been spending the past, it's been 8 years now in education technology. And I've had the great pleasure over the past couple of years to work with the Zorbit's team and to work with teachers across the country and around the world to learn about how they use digital resources and resources at large in the classroom. And these days, you know, some of those best practices that we've learned have been kind of turned on their head, or at least tweaked a bit for this home learning environment. So over the past couple of weeks, teachers have been very, very resilient and very adaptable to these new teaching environments. And some of these best practices are starting to re-emerge. So in today's session, there's a couple of things that we're going to try and accomplish. As many of you know, we've started putting out what we're calling our home learning kits. For teachers and parents. And for the teacher side of things, that includes our entire blended learning platform, unlimited access to our blended learning platform, as well as a bunch of other resources that we've been creating and curating to help support families and teachers as they're trying to extend some math learning at home. One caveat before we get started is that there's a lot of variability from district to district in terms of how we're responding to school closures. Some districts are leaving it very sort of open to the teachers to check in once every now and then, just kind of check up on the students to see how they're doing, while other districts are promoting remote lessons and synchronous virtual meetings and stuff like that. So with that in mind, I'm hoping that I will be able to present some of these best practices in a flexible enough manner that regardless of what your current situation is, we'll be able to walk out of here with some actionable tips as to what we can do with home learning in general, and how we can use the Zorbit's tools to help some of these best practices come to life. So let's dive right in. We've got about a half an hour, and I want to cover 5 main tips that we've learned from teachers over the past couple of weeks. In a nutshell, we want to make home learning accessible, rich. We want to maintain active learning. We want to stay connected with our class, and of course, we want it to become a part of a new routine. Because these days, our daily lives are anything but routine. So how do we help support families to inject a little bit of math learning into what's quickly emerging as a new normal? So without too much preamble, we're going to unpack each of these independently. But as we go through, we'll see that there's a lot of crossover here. The barriers, the boundaries between these different best practices are not cut and dry. They're very blurred boundaries, and we're going to kind of cross-reference them as we go through. We're going to start with one that's, this one's pretty straightforward in terms of how we're about to talk about accessibility. I want to be very upfront that I'm not talking about equity. I know that's a whole other kettle of fish, and we could spend a whole week talking about equity and access to different resources online in the face of, do students have access to quality internet? Do they have access to devices? When I'm talking about accessibility is making sure that parents who are trying to support home learning have as many resources as possible to be set up for success and to facilitate rich and effective math learning at home. One of the ways that we see teachers doing this is just by touching base every once in a while, probably once a week, with parents with a quick update, a little newsletter style email. And that's something that we've been trying to do as well. As part of our home learning kit, we've been sending out weekly updates that includes a few little printable resources. And with these resources, again, keeping in mind that we're focused on accessibility in terms of giving the parents everything that they need to be successful, we want to make sure that these instructions are written in such a way that they read very similar to the instructions of a game. Like if you opened up a Monopoly box or a Sorry or Pop-O-Matic Trouble, what would the instructions be like? And so they wouldn't be full of pedagogical buzzwords, that's for sure. So we've written these instructions with parents in mind. One of the things that unfortunately students might be missing out on are some of those questions that we as educators are really keen to ask to really uncover some of the learning. So in these packages, we're including some of those questions and those tips and things to watch out for so that teachers can, or excuse me, that parents can facilitate that learning and make those observations themselves. And of course, any resources, any sort of game boards or printables that we need to go along with those are included in those packages as well. We've also been creating videos, to support parents to show them how they play, how to participate in these activities. And so this is one thing that we see a lot of teachers doing these days, is that as part of their weekly check-in, save yourself some typing and turn on your camera for 2 minutes and talk to the parents about the different things that you would recommend if they want to spend some time doing math. And again, I'm speaking very sort of generally because I know there's a lot of districts that are not mandated to tell the parents that these are the things that we're going to do this week. But it is a good idea to check base and say, if you're going to do some stuff at home and teach some math at home, here are some resources, and here's how I would use them if we were in the classroom. Of course, if you are using our Zorbit's platform, you have full access to the Zorbit's Math Adventure game, and there's many benefits to the students playing the game that we'll get into in just a minute. But in order to access the game, they need their login information. And normally in the classroom, we would give out the login cards. But because we're sending this home, we want to provide a little bit more context as to what Zorbit's Math Adventure is all about, how they can access the game. And there's a couple of different ways that they can access it. As a bit of a side note here, it is not supported on Android devices, and you won't find it on your phone because the screen is so small. It's not a great experience. But there is an iPad app. If you're using an iPad at home, you can download that. And on just about any other device, you can access the web version at play.zorbitsmath.com. Some context information regarding navigating the game, and of course, their login information. Now, these parent letters are in our teacher dashboard. I'm going to switch over to my teacher dashboard to show you really quickly how you can find those. So I'm at dashboard.zorbitsmath.com. When I first log in here, I'm going to be prompted to create a class and to add students to that class. I've already done that, and so I'm going to skip over some of those steps. There's pretty, hand-holding tutorials that'll take you through that when you log in. But you'll create your student accounts in the roster area, and this is also where you're going to find those parent letters. If we were in the classroom and we could print them all off and send them home one at a time, 1 page per student, then I'd recommend downloading this full set here with that giant parent letters button. But because that downloads in one giant PDF, it's going to be difficult to chop up and send home individual login information. So there's these buttons down here where you can print off or download individual parent letters. So given the fact that we're probably attaching these to emails home to parents, I'd recommend downloading them independently and attaching them to an individual email home to those parents. So that's where we can find those parent letters. And like I said, this is going to give parents access to the game at home. So now that we know that we're making those touch points and we're making these resources accessible, we want to make sure that the resources that we're sending home are rich resources. I'm seeing my Facebook and my Twitter becoming littered with these types of memes these days. And, part of me thinks that they're hilarious, and part of me, the educator in me kind of cringes a little bit. And, learning how to do, to carry that one and do those procedural approaches to problem solving is fantastic. But we know that there's more to the picture than just that procedural piece. What we have a tendency to do is to teach the way that we've taught, and as parents at home, we go on Google and start looking for math resources or math worksheets. These are the sorts of things that we have seen in our educational career. And so these are the things that parents will see as like, oh, I recognize this, I feel comfortable with this. I might even be able to help my kid out with this type of approach. But as we know, this is heavily focused on procedural fluency, and those types of activities, particularly if a student doesn't already have that conceptual understanding, or if they're just rattling off those math facts, these types of activities can actually do more harm than good. They can create math anxiety. And so that's why we want to focus on activities, send home activities that we know if we would be using in our classroom if we were still in the classroom today. So the way that we try and give students the conceptual understanding from which procedural fluency comes out of is by giving them activities that are not consumption-based. They're creation-based. They're rich math tasks that really focus on multiple representations, visual models, and rather than just rushing to the abstraction of numerals and math facts. We want to focus on, how do we arrive at those solutions? So when they first log into the game, this is an example from the Aurora Farms, grade 3 planet of Aurora Farms that focuses on multiplication. And here we have to construct arrays. And when we first arrive on the planet, we're going to see problems that are relatively straightforward in that there will be one array that can be made. Perhaps we only need to make an array of 18. But as the students start to get that visualization, they start to understand what that visual representation means and start to develop that conceptual understanding. The problems are going to get a little bit more rich where we now have to put a couple of different arrays in this somewhat limiting game board here. Now, a lot of you are looking at this problem here now, and you're probably half paying attention to me and half trying to figure out where you would put these arrays of 18, 15, and 9. And that's fantastic, because if I were to ask 6 of you where you would put those arrays, you'd probably give me 6 different answers. And which is another really great feature of the way that this game approaches math learning, is that it opens it up for student agency. It gives students the ability to explore the math concepts and to demonstrate an understanding that makes sense for them. So that's a sneak peek inside the Zorbit's Math Adventure game. And if we were playing this in our classroom, we certainly wouldn't just hand them the device and let them go hog wild on it. We always use digital resources with intention, and that's a big part of blended learning. It's not tech for tech's sake. We use tech with intentionality. And now that we're remote, that intentionality piece should not go away. So one of the things that we can do when students log into the game is we can guide that in-game experience. We can give them access to the areas of the game, because it's a big place. It covers kindergarten to grade 3 and just about all of the curriculum contained within those grades. We can guide them and send them to the grade areas that we want them focusing on. We can close and open different planets that represent different curriculum strands. And the way that we do that is I'm going to pop back into my teacher dashboard here. Again, it's at dashboard.zorbitsmath.com. And before you send your students into the game, I would highly recommend visiting your game controls so that when the students log in, it's a very guided experience. Let's say I'm teaching a grade 1 class. That means I want to turn off the grade 3 area. I want to turn off the grade 2 area. And I'm even going to turn off the kindergarten area. And when I get into the grade 1 section, I can see that, well, we've got the full year's worth of curriculum covered here. If I want them focusing on specific concepts, I can control which planets they see when they log into the game. I can do this for the entire class, or you know what? I know Charlie's having a little trouble, so I'm going to move him back down to the kindergarten area, and I'm going to personalize his access. It's going to be a little bit different from the rest of the class, but because in the game he's not going to see the label kindergarten, I can personalize and give him the remedial support that he needs and deserves without making him feel like he's less than his peers or that he's operating below grade level. The way that these game controls are set up is that it's designed to empower teachers to personalize that experience without having to worry about that equity piece. Another way we can personalize the in-game experience and dig even deeper on concepts or focus more intentionally on specific concepts is to create an assignment. So again, still inside the dashboard in our assignments area, there's a little wizard that'll pop up here and take us through step by step as to how to create this assignment. So I'm going to create one really quickly here on skip counting. This is a grade 1 concept. We're teaching a grade 1 class, and we're focusing on New Beeland. And this is where I get to select what concepts I want them focusing on. We're dealing with skip counting, so we're going to do counting by 2s and counting by 5s. And I can decide how many activities I want to include in that assignment. 3 of each, that's going to be about 35 minutes. That's pretty decent. This might be something that they can pick away at during the week. I'm going to deliver it to everybody, and I can see that some of the students already have some understanding of it. This is going to be fairly novel for others. And then I can select my due date. This is for next week. Now we've got other tutorial videos that I'm going to point you guys at the end to show you a little bit more in depth all of the different features and the data that's collected by these things. But before we move on, I want to show you very quickly what it looks like from the student side of things. So as you create those assignments, these custom game modules appear in the game for the students, and they can access them from their backpack. So there's always this little button up in the corner, it's their backpack, and that's where they'll find the custom missions that you've created for them. In the game, we call them adventures, because students don't like that word assignments necessarily, and they don't want to complete an assignment, they want to go on an adventure. So we can guide this in-game experience by configuring those game controls and sending them on custom adventures each. So that's the digital side of things. Again, if we were in the classroom, students would not be sat down in their desks all day, every day. They would be up and socializing and collaborating and talking to each other and devising strategies together. And that's the other side of blended learning, is using these offline resources and being very active in our learning and not just passively completing worksheets. We want these activities to be very playful and very collaborative. And so that's why we've started creating ones that are, well, I shouldn't say we've started creating them. We've continued creating activities that are very playful, very social, very collaborative, but are now currently being designed or at least flagged for at-home use. We always design them to be accessible in terms of you don't really need fancy equipment in your classroom or at home to participate in these, but they are, well, you'll notice at first glance that they're not worksheets. They're lesson plans, they're games, they're exploratory activities that are meant to be very playful. And students can play these over and over again. They're not consumption-based activities. They're focused on creation. So we get to be creative. We get to learn kinesthetically. We get to make our own variations of these games and just use design thinking at home. And although we've been including some new ones in our home learning kit updates that we're sending to your inboxes if you've already signed up for them, we also have an existing library in our dashboard that you can come into and grab some that have been here for quite some time. In our teaching activities library, we can use our filters to drill down to the concepts that we want. And then this last filter is going to be particularly useful these days because granted, there are many activities in here that are more designed for classroom implementation. Math talks, for example, is something that work best when we have a group of students together sharing ideas. Or a guided lesson is something almost like a 3-act math task that really leverages the collaboration inside the classroom. But these games and exploratory activities are fantastic for home use. And soon we're going to be adding another little tag down to the bottom of this filter that's going to say at home or designed for at home use. I'm not sure the exact language, but it should be evident when you see it that these are the activities that work really exceptionally well for at home use. One of my favorites down here is addition on a number line. And as I pop back into my, my slides here, it was the inspiration for this one that we did at home. It was around Easter time when we did this. So we didn't use a number line in the hallway. We put down bunny footprints. And you know, my kids got to roll their dice and they hopped down the hallway. They would roll the dice a second time and we would talk about the addition. We had a piece of paper taped to the wall here where we would write out the dot patterns on the dice for my younger daughter, and then write out the numerals for my grade 1 daughter, and we talk about their addition strategy. So again, it's very kinesthetic and it's very playful. At its core, what we're doing is we're practicing addition, but we're not doing it through that stale worksheet we saw a moment ago, you know, that multiplication drill and kill approach. We're doing it very playfully and we're developing that conceptual understanding from which procedural fluency will come out. I mentioned a moment ago, this idea of math talks and 3-act math tasks is something that doesn't necessarily lend itself really well out of the classroom, but we kind of took that as a challenge. And we thought, well, what do those things look like in an asynchronous environment? How can we support the at-home participation in math talks and these 3-act math tasks? So we started putting together these videos called Mathematics in the House. And it highlights, its purpose is to highlight the fact that there's math all around us. At no point in the videos are we saying, here's how you solve this problem. There's characters in these videos that are chiming in with their strategies. Myself as Matt, I'm never saying, here's how we do it. I'm always getting audience participation, encouraging them to pause the video and talk to the person next to them. And the motto of the entire web series is we learn better when we learn together. And so we really encourage students to take their time, explore different strategies. And even if it's different from the ones that we're showing on screen, that we want them to see that plan through fruition. So in doing so, we make this asynchronous endeavor a little bit more interactive. Number 4 is that we want to stay connected. I mentioned earlier that playing the game, playing Zorbit's Math Adventure, the video game, is has its benefits beyond just giving them parents an opportunity to offer guilt-free screen time, as well as offering them some agency and some really rich visual models. But it also offers you the opportunity as the teacher to stay connected. A lot of districts and a lot of teachers are wondering about what formative and summative assessment looks like these days. This is one of my favorite analogies. I love this idea that formative assessment is when the chef tastes the soup, because we still have time. We still have time to change the trajectory of that soup. We can add a little salt, add another bay leaf, a little garlic, and taste it and say, all right, now we're ready. This analogy breaks down a little bit when you start to think about the soup as the student learning. It's not something that we consume and then move on with the rest of our meal. But I do like the idea that, the summative assessment is when the guests taste the soup. It kind of speaks to the high stake nature. It's like, this is, the culmination of everything we've done in the kitchen or in the classroom comes down to this moment when the guest gets to taste it. And this works really well in the classroom, but what happens now when the soup becomes digital? And we're lucky to see a socially distanced soup once a week in a Google Hangout, right? It becomes very difficult to make those observations that we as educators are so great at making, to keep in touch with how they're performing on specific math concepts. So as they're playing the game, the dashboard, your teacher dashboard, is collecting curriculum aligned performance data that's going to help you stay connected, both in terms of those assessments, as well as helping you facilitate intervention. So you can stay connected in terms of how they're doing, but also you can stay connected in terms of, what am I going to do about that? What can I do to help support my students? So this is kind of really the whole raison d'etre for our teacher dashboard, is to help teachers facilitate intervention. And now that we are socially distancing, this becomes a vital part of many teachers' assessment and intervention strategy. So at our homepage, we can see high-level trends. We can receive some recommendations. If we go into our class progress area, we can see all of the data that we've collected. We can see how every individual in our class is doing on all of the concepts that they've engaged with in the game. And I can see high-level trends here as well for individuals. I can see Charlie is struggling across the board. If I've been working with Charlie all year, I probably already know this, but I can see specific concepts that really need my attention. I can also see that addition across the board is something that the class needs a bit of support with. If we were talking about, if it was business as usual, this is where I'd start talking about center-based lesson or small group instruction. But instead, we're going to talk a little bit about how we can create routines in just a moment. But I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper into this data. I'm going to click on Charlie's dot here. So all of these dots are clickable, and when you do so, you get a concept report that's going to dig even deeper into this assessment data. I can see that based on Charlie's in-game participation, he can add to 10 like nobody's business. Whatever strategy he's using, he can add his numbers up to 10. But whatever strategy he's using, it's not being extrapolated into larger numbers. He's struggling when he runs out of fingers to count on, or when he's come to the end of the math facts that he's memorized. So this tells me as the teacher that there's some foundational understanding, some conceptual understanding that's missing here. So again, where are my students? I can see where he's falling down. I can see what his strengths are. I can even see what strategies he might be using. But what can I do about that? This button here brings me back into my teaching activities library. And instead of manually filtering through the library, the system is going to provide some recommendations. It's going to pre-populate those filters and give you some activities that you can send home for those parents to run at home. And again, these have those key questions that that parents can ask. These are the questions that you would be asking in class to help illuminate what's going on in those students' brains. What is it they're thinking? What strategies are they using? And when parents ask these questions, without fail, they're always surprised as to what comes out of their kids' mouths. They suddenly start to realize that's why she's so anxious around these worksheets that I've been printing off. This is why he's having trouble carrying the one, because he just doesn't understand why that's the case. So we can start to, parents get to start to think a little bit more like teachers And again, that answers the question, where is my student? But more importantly, what can I do about that? If we need to support that learner, we have some recommendations here. If we want to extend it and provide some enrichment, we have some recommendations built into these assets as well. So again, you can find these in your teaching activities library by manually filtering, or if you go through your class progress area, you'll be able to receive recommendations based on the content that you're focusing on. The last tip that I want to share with you guys is, as teachers, we know how important routine is. That's why we spend the first 2 months of the year, particularly in kindergarten to grade 3, developing those routines. 1, 2, 3, all eyes on me. Those sorts of things are things that we develop at the beginning of the year because it helps make their day more predictable. It helps them feel more secure and more safe. And all of this is prerequisite to good learning. As parents, we know that that's easier said than done, particularly given the situation in which we're trying to provide some homeschooling. But how can we help teachers, or excuse me, how can we help parents and families inject a little bit of math learning into their daily routine? Well, we've started taking that on as a challenge as well, and we've started creating assets like this, these daily math challenges. And whether you're using these ones or coming up with your own challenges, the key element here is that these activities are easy to implement in that they can take 5 minutes. They are conversation starters or things that we can do around the breakfast table, or take 5 minutes before we wind down to brush our teeth before bed. Or some of them can also take an entire afternoon if we really want to sink our teeth into it. It'll be 5 minutes, or we can really kill an afternoon exploring the different math concepts that are baked in here. Another way that we see these things coming to life, or people developing routines, is through the assignments feature. I mentioned earlier, showed you earlier how to create these, but allowing students to go in and explore the game at their leisure is fantastic. But if that's the only thing that we're doing to guide that in-game experience, students are going to, they run the risk of getting bored if they don't have any guidance inside the game. So that's why we see a lot of teachers creating weekly assignments, something that they can work on throughout the week. Or you can even create daily assignments through the teacher dashboard, and have them quick and dirty assignments that just have 1 or 2 little activities for them to incorporate into their screen time. So to recap, a couple of these tips that we've seen come out of teachers in the past couple of weeks, a couple of these best practices. Some of these are just basically extensions of what we would be doing in the classroom, but modifying them a little bit for at-home use. We want to make sure that we're giving parents as many resources as we can to set them up for success. That includes the resources that we're sending home, as well as the supports to help them implement those resources. We want to make sure that those resources and those learning experiences are rich and they're not just focused on procedural fluency, right? I don't want to demonize that approach too much, but procedural fluency does naturally come out of conceptual understanding. So if we're just focusing on one strand, we're doing a little bit of a disservice. So let's make sure that the resources that we're sending home, the tips that we're sending home, focus on more than just that one strand of mathematical proficiency. We want students up out of their seats. We want them being as social and as collaborative as possible when they're playing with math. And I use that word very intentionally, when we're playing with math. It should be something that they look forward to, and not something that's like, oh, Dad's got another worksheet for us today. I guess we better go do this so we can, so we can earn our Nintendo privileges for the day. They should look forward to it, and one way we can do that is to make it very active and very playful. We can still stay connected in terms of our assessment and the way that we guide their instruction or guide their math learning from afar, using some of those game controls, using the assessment data that comes in, and creating assignments that respond to that data. And then finally, giving parents the resources and opportunities to introduce these, a bit of math learning into their daily routine. Like I said, in our days our daily routine these days is anything but routine. So however we can slot a little bit of math learning in there, I think is a fantastic thing. If you haven't already signed up for our home learning kit, you're going to get all of these resources that we saw inside the Zorbit's Math Adventure blended learning platform. Plus, we're going to send you an email each week with some new assets, some new videos, and new tutorials. So if you haven't already signed up, this is the link that you can get access to it. If you've got an iPhone, just open up your camera and scan that QR code, and you can sign up for free. It's all completely free and unlimited access. And aside from that, follow us on Twitter because we're sharing lots of great tips. This is where we're getting a lot of these tips and best practices, is through our global community of Zorbit's teachers and dedicated educators. So follow us on social media. There's lots of great resources there, and you can keep up on what our community is up to. And if you have any questions, if you're anything like me, as soon as we hang up this call, you think, oh, that was the question I meant to ask. Don't hesitate to reach out to us directly afterwards. So with that, Beth, I'm going to hand it back over to you. I think I made it in just under time, which is great, or it's 3:01 my time, so I went 1 minute over. I'm in no rush. I'm going to stick around as long as we have to answer as many questions as we can. Beth, have there been any questions coming in?
Hey, yeah, there's lots here to answer, lots of great questions. So let me start out. So the first question, what technology is necessary for the game? And will there be an Android version at all?
So there's currently not an Android version. That's something that, it's currently, I can't promise that there will be one in the near future. All I can say is that Android is not currently supported. If you have an iPad, usually iPad generation 3 or more recent, should support the game. In terms of the web version, basically any non-Android device. So if you have a Chromebook or a laptop or a desktop at home, you should be able to access the most up-to-date version of the game at play.zorbitsmath.com. We can share the support article that gets into more specifics as to the technical requirements after the call. But apart from getting into all those nitty-gritty details, like I said, iPad and the web version are the most accessible ways to get into the game.
Great. So the next question, can you edit the assignments or go back and see what you selected for focus on that assignment? For example, is there a way to detect what areas they need help on? I know it's color-coded, etc., but how do you know what exactly they struggled with?
That's a great point. So I have a bunch of dummy assignments in here. This is my sandbox account. So it's not going to be as colorful as if I had a class of students working on these assignments, but I do have one here that will show you what that progress looks like. As students are completing the assignments, you can see what progress they've made, who started, who has not yet started. And when you click on view progress, you can see how they're doing with these concepts. Now, unfortunately, when I first made this one, I gave it a bit of a fun thematic name. It's a field trip to New Zealand. I've since learned that the best practice is to give it a more mathematically focused name. So what did I assign? I have no idea based on the name, but I can go into this context menu here and see the details. And I can see that this specific assignment was focused on anchors of 5 and counting by 5. So I was really focused on, counting groups when I assigned this. I have 3 focused on anchors of 5. So starting at 5 and counting on, and then transitioning into skip counting. Another interesting thing to note here is that this data lives as a subset in our class progress area. So if I wanted to see specifically who's struggling with what, there's Charlie Donovan, who was struggling earlier. This is the data that was collected from that assignment. And I can click in and see that, 76% on anchors to 5. The rest he hasn't seen yet, but this is an area that he's doing okay with, but could use a little bit of extra support. So there's 2 ways that you can access that data. We can access all of the data that's collected from the game, both assignment as well as open exploration. Or if I'm just interested on that specific concept within that time frame, almost like a summative assessment, then I can come in here and see that subset of data as well. I hope that answers the question. I was a bit of a long-winded response there. I hope I hit the nail on the head there at some point.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, we've got lots more questions here. Where can we access some of the home learning kit resources as well as the mathematics videos and the other videos?
So the printable resources, we're going to be adding into the dashboard in the very near future. Soon on your class homepage, you're going to see a card that's focused on home learning resources. So that's where you're going to find those. We're also going to be putting it on a website in the near future. We can share that URL with you once it's up and running. As for the teacher tutorials that we've been creating, folks that, facilitating home learning, as well as the mathematics episodes, they're on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube and search Zorbit's Math, you'll find our channel, and there's a couple of playlists there that you will be able to find all of those videos.
Awesome. So I have another question here. How can I see what students are seeing in the game, like when I create an assignment?
That's a great question. So if I create an assignment, if I want to see specifically what's been assigned, what I would recommend is in your class roster page, add yourself as a student. Give yourself some login credentials so that, like in this instance, Mr. Barber has his own username and password. So he can go in and see anything that he's assigned to himself. So if he's creating one assignment for the entire class, he can go in and see that same assignment through the student's eyes when he logs in. If he's making 3 or 4 and giving it to different students, then he can assign all of those to himself and go in and see those assignments as well. Another way we can get into the game is through this play button here. This is what we call our teacher sandbox, in that although the game controls aren't going to be reflected in here, the assignments you create aren't going to be in here, but what is in here is the game fully unlocked. So if you want to go and explore and use it as part of your lesson planning process and see what activities you want to really emphasize this week, this is a great way to jump into the game and just explore absolutely everything that the game has to offer. But if you want to see what your students are seeing, create yourself as a student and go to play.zorbitsmath.com and log in using your own credentials. You'll see the impact of your game control decision.
Cool. Okay, so actually, I just have a comment here, Matt. Apparently, we will be working potentially on an Android version. So keep your eyes peeled. We don't really have a timeline on this at the moment, but for anyone that's interested, just keep your eyes peeled for an announcement on that, because it's something that we are discussing.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Someone is asking, is Zorbit available in French?
So we do have a French immersion version of the game. It's as fun to play as it is to say, a French immersion version. The dashboard is strictly in English right now. We're currently translating a handful of resources, like that calendar we saw. Some of the printable activities are currently in translation. But if you want your students playing the game in French, we come into our class settings here, and we can change. Oh, I'm just seeing delete class here. I should see an edit button here. I can see edit curriculum. But this is where I've got a bit of a case of the demos right now, and there's a button missing. But this is where I would change the language from English to French. And actually, there's another way we can do this. Come out here and go to our class settings. There we go. Now I can turn the game into French. So just one more time, I came out of my class. I went to my classes, found the class that I'm working with, went to my class settings, and changed my language. So what this is going to do is change Zorbit's Math Adventure into, forgive my terrible French, but Les Aventures de Mathématiques de Zorbit. So when they log in, all of the feedback, all of the vocabulary, everything that's in the game will be translated into French.
Cool, great. Okay, so we have a question, and actually I'm not sure if, Matt, you know the latest updates. Someone is asking if we have any ability to see how long kids have been playing for, or how frequently they've been logging in. So our team has actually been working on this. We estimate probably 2 to 3 weeks to have a solution for this. It's not something we have at the moment, but it's something we're getting a lot of questions on. So we are actually working on this right now. Okay. Let me just see here. There's more questions. Okay. Oh, also, just a note, some people were saying throughout the session that some of the slides were blurry. In addition to the recording, we're also going to include the slides. So that way, if you do want to reference the recording, you can just look at the slides as you're going through if that's an issue for anybody. So that they're handy for you. I think, Matt, you already answered this, I think possibly. Is there any way to see what the game students are playing looks like? Maybe you didn't.
Right, so that's where I would suggest going into this this play area where you can access the game. It's fully unlocked, so you can see what the activities are. So if a student gets stuck on an activity, you know what activity they're talking about, how to support them. But also, if you wanted to access the game through the student's eyes and see any assignments that you've assigned or any of the game controls and how that impacts the game, create yourself as a student and log in to the game using that login.
Cool. I do have a question here. Someone's asking, did the students cross off their own assignments on the bottom of the screen when they've completed it, or is this done automatically? Matt, are you still there?
Up there a little bit. Could you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry, you just cut out for me. The question is, do students cross off their own assignment when they've completed it, or is this done automatically in the system?
So in the system, you're going to see that they've completed it in here in the view progress. And I believe in the game, when they finish the activity, it kind of concludes itself. So we can see that, you know, Erica Jenkins has completed the activity, all the assignments. Tegan Murphy has completed it. We can see their progress here in those in this view progress window.
Great. I do have some more questions here. Just give me a second. So somebody asked, if you create an assignment, will they need to do that adventure first? Or like, how does that actually appear for the students? Are they forced to do that assignment?
That's a great question. So this is the way that it will appear in the game. It's something that will appear as an alert in their backpack. If they happen to land on the planet that the assignment is aligned to, they'll see this little tab off to the side. But the game does not get shut down until they complete that assignment. They still have the ability to explore any planets that you have made available to them through the game controls. So if they have 3 or 4 different planets available and an assignment, they can do either. They can go to one planet or the other, or they can go into the adventures menu and play that. So short answer, no, it's not mandatory to complete the assignment before they're allowed to move on. But if you want to make it mandatory before they move on, I would recommend turning off all of the planets. So the only way to access content is the content that you've assigned through the adventures or through the assignments.
Cool. So I'm going to ask one more question. Anything that we didn't get to, we will follow up by email. We have everyone's name here, so even if you didn't leave your email, we should be able to get back to you. But something actually that relates to what you were just talking about, Matt. Someone's asking what the difference is between allowing students access through the game controls versus giving an assignment.
So they're kind of two sides of the same coin. The game controls allow us to, one way of looking at it is to lock down areas that we don't want students accessing, and thereby keeping them focused on the things that we do want them accessing. By the way that I have my game control set up currently, all of the grade 1 students have access to this planet of New Beeland, where they're going to engage with different counting concepts. And they can really go anywhere on this planet the way that I have this set up right now. They can jump into the skip counting area or the counting backwards area or counting groups area. They have a lot more agency in terms of the different concepts that they can focus on. So we can limit it to a certain extent, but there's still a lot of areas on this planet for them to explore. If I want them focusing on something very specific, well, the assignments feature allows me to get even more specific. So this planned assignment that I made a moment ago, when I go in and have a look at the concepts, I've focused on counting by 2s and counting by 5s, where if they were exploring the planet themselves, they would have counting by 10s, counting backwards by 2s, counting backwards by 1s, counting dice patterns, 10 frames. There's dozens of different concepts that they could be exploring, but this allows me to be much more granular. And one way of looking at this is if the game controls allows me to turn areas of the game off so that they don't get distracted by them, this is a way for me to really highlight a specific area where for areas that I do want them to be focusing.
Cool. So yeah, we're going to end the questions there now. Just a couple random questions that have come in. People are asking about the math calendar. I did share a link to the April one, but you can also find it through our social media, and we'll soon be having those posted on the dashboard. We will also be creating calendars for May and June, both of which we will have in French. The April one currently isn't available in French, but we will be doing that for the May and June calendars. We will also be sending this recording within the next 24 to 48 hours, and we will include the slides like I mentioned. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to us directly. You can also email support@zorbitsmath.com, and we have a full team of people here ready to answer your questions. Okay, anything else you'd like to end with, Matt?
Just thank you very much for taking time out of your busy days today to come join us and have this conversation. Hopefully you found it useful and have picked up a few tips and tricks, not just in terms of how to use the Zorbits platform, but some ideas as to how we can facilitate home learning and make it more accessible, make it rich, active, and stay connected, and build it into our routine. So thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate your time.